Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors Legal Hotline lawyer. And today we're going to talk about another new form introduced on February 23rd, 2017. This form is identified as the appointment of subagency. It's Form 1S. This is not a form that ever has to be signed by anybody other than the designated broker in your office. Now there is a signature place on the form for the listing broker and the sub-agent, and you'll understand why in a little bit. And it's important for the listing agent and the sub-agent to be aware of what's happened, and that's why those signature lines are there. But I'm introducing this form to you by telling you that the only person who has to sign is the designated broker, because I want you to understand what this form does and how it does what it does. Okay, here's what it does. You're familiar with a listing agent getting a listing with a seller. But in reality, the listing agent isn't getting the listing. That listing is a contract between the listing firm and the seller. And the listing agent has been given authority by the DB of the firm to enter listing agreements on behalf of the firm. So that's why the listing agent can sign the listing agreement with the seller and create a contract between the listing firm and the seller. But those are the two contracting parties, the listing firm and the seller. And if you read the listing agreement, you will see that within the terms of the listing agreement, the designated broker of the listing firm appoints the listing agent as the firm's sub-agent representing the seller. That same paragraph goes on to say that the appointed sub-agent, we in the industry refer to that appointed sub-agent as the listing broker, but that appointed sub-agent is seller's only agent in the firm, along with any managing broker who manages that sub-agent. So if there's a managing broker and then a designated broker who manages that managing broker, however many managing brokers have authority for this listing broker, all of those managing brokers also have an agency relationship with the seller. That's all contained within this paragraph of the listing agreement. And then that paragraph says one more thing. If designated broker wants to appoint another one of designated broker's licensees to be a sub-agent of seller, designated broker retains the authority to do that. Designated broker retains the authority to do that. So all that is required for an additional broker to be designated as an agent, a sub-agent of seller, is for designated broker to say it has happened. That's the purpose of this new form, Form 1S. We have seen a variety of circumstances where an appointment of an additional sub-agent for the seller would be useful. Sometimes it arises in a team scenario. One team member is the listing broker, another team member is the buyer's broker, but for whatever reason, the person who would typically be a buyer's broker needs to move over and represent the seller. Maybe the listing broker is going to be out of town, maybe they've gotten sick, maybe there's been an exposure of the seller's confidential information to this other team member, and so the DB needs to make this other team member a sub-agent of the seller in order to shield that confidential information for the seller. Or maybe there is another broker in the firm who wants to hold an open house for the seller on a given day, and seller says, no, I don't want anybody who's not my own agent to hold my house open. So designated broker can make an additional appointment of sub-agency to another broker licensed to the firm and make that broker an additional sub-agent of seller. Within Form 1S, there is a time provision for this appointment of sub-agency. The sub-agency can endure for as long as the listing agreement is in place. It can endure until the designated broker revokes it, or it can be established to endure for only a pre-designated amount of time, all based on the language already in Form 1S. Finally, Form 1S says that the firm will notify seller of this new appointment of subagency. Notice that there is no requirement to obtain seller's permission. Seller consented to this when seller signed the listing agreement. But the form does say that the firm will put seller on notice of this new appointment of subagency. And again, there's a spot for listing broker and the new subagent to sign because everybody has to know what's going on. But again, it's the designated broker's signature that makes this happen. This form is a new concept in our industry. What this form accomplishes is not a new concept, but it's not a concept that very many firms have taken advantage of in the past because frankly, it's been a little complicated to come up with on your own if you didn't already have a form. Now that this form exists, I suspect that this will become something that happens quite frequently within firms because it is important for designated brokers to keep agency clear, who represents whom. And the use of the subagency form will allow designated brokers to make it very clear to both sellers and brokers who they are representing in any given transaction. If you have questions on how to use this form or any of the statewide forms, any of the forms revisions, or any of the old forms, that's why you're a Realtor member. It's so that you can send an email to the legal hotline and you're going to get an answer to your question. Send me an email, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.